Hello, my name is Ethan Carter, 32 years old. I'm an agricultural engineer living on a small farm in the suburbs of Iowa, where endless cornfields stretch out and the deep blue sky feels like a promise of freedom. I'm not the type to talk about myself, but if you're here ready to listen to this story, I'll try to open up. My life, how do I put it, is like a freshly sown field. Calm on the surface, but beneath it, there's a whole world quietly pushing upward, defying storms. I live with Sarah, my wife, who I always feel luckier than I deserve to have as my partner. Sarah is a 30-year-old elementary school teacher with a smile as warm as autumn sunlight and eyes that shine with patience. She teaches the village kids how to read, write, and dream. But for me, Sarah teaches me how to believe in myself, even when the world seems to want me to doubt. We live in an old wooden house, its white paint weathered by time, nestled in the middle of my farm, where I pour my heart into researching sustainable agriculture. There's nothing glamorous here, no penthouse, no fancy cars, just soil, plants, and the dreams we sow together. But before I go on, I should probably talk about my family, the people who shaped me for better or worse. My family, well, they're a puzzle I've never quite solved. My parents, Robert and Linda Carter, are what you'd call upper middle class. My dad was a senior manager at an insurance company, and my mom worked as an administrative clerk at City Hall. They live in a tidy house in Des Moines, with a neatly trimmed lawn and weekend dinner parties always full of guests. For them, success is measured in money, status, and handshakes from important people. And in their eyes, I, their eldest son, am a major disappointment. Then there's Liam, my younger brother, 29, 3 years my junior. But we're like two people living on different planets. Liam is an investment banker in Chicago, living in a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, driving a sleek BMW and always with a model girlfriend by his side. He's my parents' pride and joy, the star of the Carter family. Every time Liam visits, both mom and dad light up as if he's the only sun in the sky. Me? I'm just the faint shadow standing behind, a farmer they never truly understood. I remember the day I told my parents I wanted to study agricultural engineering. It was a summer evening just after I graduated high school and was preparing college applications. We were sitting around the dinner table and Mom had made Dad's favorite beef stew. I took a deep breath, mustered all my courage, and said, I want to study agriculture, do something to make the land more sustainable. The room went still. Dad put down his knife and fork, staring at me like I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. Mom gave an awkward laugh and asked, You mean, be a farmer? Her voice was full of disbelief, as if that was the worst thing I could choose. Liam, only 15 at the time, snorted and said, You're gonna spend your life with your face in the dirt? My parents didn't say much more, but their looks said enough. They wanted me to be a lawyer, a doctor, or at the very least a banker like Liam. But agriculture? To them, it was the path of losers. From then on, it was like a loop. Every family gathering, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, I was the target of their jabs. Dad would say, Look at Liam and learn. At least he knows how to make money. Mom would sigh, complaining that I embarrassed them in front of their friends because I didn't have a fancy house or car. Liam, of course, was always ready to pour fuel on the fire. He called my farm a pile of junk, called me a poor farmer, and always ended with a smug smile like he'd won a chess game. But the breaking point, I suppose, was my wedding day with Sarah. It was a beautiful June day with golden sunlight and gentle breezes rustling the cornfields around the farm. We held the ceremony outdoors, simple but heartfelt. Sarah wore a pristine white dress, her curly hair cascading down, looking like a muse stepped out of a painting. I was clumsy in my suit, my heart pounding as I watched her walk toward me. It was a moment I thought nothing could ruin, until my family opened their mouths. During the reception, as everyone raised their glasses in celebration, Liam stood up, grabbed the microphone, and started his speech. I'd hoped he'd say something kind, but no. Congratulations to my brother Ethan, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, who chose to bury his life in the mud, but it's okay. At least he has Sarah to share that farm. The room erupted in laughter except for me and Sarah. I felt Sarah's hand pat my thigh as if to soothe the anger rising in my chest. My parents clapped as if it was a harmless joke. Mom even added as she passed by me, "Ethan, you still have time to wake up and do something worthwhile." Dad just nodded as if he agreed. I didn't respond. I forced a smile, held Sarah tighter. She whispered in my ear, "You don't need to prove anything to them. I love you for who you are." And that's why I love her, because she sees me, truly sees me, when my entire family only sees me through the lens of disappointment. But don't get me wrong, I'm not someone who gives up easily. I love my work. The farm isn't just land. It's where I test ideas I believe can change the world. I've spent years researching automated irrigation systems, soil analysis software, and drought-resistant crop varieties. I've quietly built Carter AgTech, an agricultural technology company that few people know about, not even my family. I don't share it with them, not because I fear their criticism, but because I know they wouldn't care. To them, I'll always be the poor farmer. Sarah is the only one who knows what I'm working on. She often sits with me in the small basement office where I'm hunched over writing code or analyzing data from soil sensors. On nights when I'm so exhausted I want to give up, she brings me a cup of coffee, puts her hand on my shoulder, and says, "You're doing something amazing, Ethan. Don't let them make you doubt." And so I keep going, not to prove anything to my family, but because I believe in the path I've chosen. The days following our wedding were filled with simple joy. Sarah and I fixed up the old wooden house, repainted the walls, and turned it into our home. Sarah hung her paintings, cornfields under sunsets, wildflowers by the fence, adding warmth to the place. I spent my time in the fields testing the soil, installing irrigation systems, and working on projects I'd dreamed up since college. But farm life, as I quickly learned, wasn't easy. It demanded patience, sweat, and sometimes heartbreaking failures. Our farm wasn't large, just about 20 acres, mostly corn with some soybeans. But I didn't want a farm like everyone else. I wanted something bigger, a sustainable agricultural system using technology to save water, boost yields, and protect the land for future generations. I'd started Carter AgTech, a small company I quietly built in the basement office. There I coded soil analysis software, designed moisture sensors, and tested drought-resistant crops. But turning ideas into reality required time, money, and faith, something my family never gave me. Those first few months, Sarah and I faced countless challenges. That summer, a prolonged drought nearly wiped out our corn crop. I stood in the field staring at the wilting plants under the scorching sun, feeling like the world was against me. Sarah found me one afternoon slumped on the ground, hands in my hair. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "We'll get through this, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "Together, okay?" I looked at her, her bright eyes a reminder I wasn't alone, and so we pressed on. To make ends meet, Sarah continued teaching at the elementary school 15 miles away. She left early in the morning and returned at dusk, never once complaining. In the evenings, she'd help me sort data from the soil sensors, even though she barely understood technology. "I don't get these numbers," she'd laugh, pointing at the computer screen. "But I trust you know what you're doing." Her support kept me grounded, especially on days I doubted myself. But the struggles weren't just from the land or weather. My family, like a thorn in my heart, always found ways to hurt me. Every family gathering, Thanksgiving, birthdays, Christmas, was a test. I remember our first Thanksgiving after the wedding, when Sarah and I drove to Des Moines for dinner with my parents. Naively, I hoped they'd see me differently. But no. When I mentioned my automated irrigation project, Dad cut me off. "Irrigation? You're chasing pipe dreams. Learn from Liam." Liam, sitting across, smirked and chimed in. Bro, that farm's a dump. Sell it, get a real job in the city. Mom sighed, looking at me like I was a lost child. Ethan, you're embarrassing me in front of my friends, she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, trying to keep me calm. But I saw her eyes well up. Not for herself, but because she knew how much it hurt me. On the drive home, I was silent, feeling like a failure despite my efforts. Sarah finally spoke. Ethan, you don't need to prove anything to them. You're doing something amazing, and I'm proud of you. I pulled over, hugged her, and felt my pain melt in her embrace. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for being here. Their taunts only fueled my resolve. I threw myself into work, putting in 16-hour days from the fields to the lab. Some nights I passed out at my desk, surrounded by papers and computer screens. Sarah would bring me coffee, gently urging me to sleep. But she knew I couldn't stop. Not to prove my family wrong, but because I believed in what I was doing. After 2 years of relentless effort, my work began to bear fruit. A large agricultural company in California reached out, wanting to test my irrigation system on their vineyards. I remember the moment I got that email early one morning while Sarah was making coffee in the kitchen. I shouted, ran to her, nearly knocking the kettle from her hands. They want to buy my system, I said, my voice trembling with excitement. Sarah beamed, hugging me tightly. I knew you'd do it, she said. That contract brought in $200,000, enough to expand my research and hire 2 engineers. From there, Carter AgTech took off. My soil analysis software was used by a university in Nebraska for research, and my patents caught investors' attention. By the 3rd year after our wedding, my company was valued at $60 million with clients in the US, Canada, and even Africa. But Sarah and I stayed simple, still in our old wooden house, still driving our beat-up pickup. For us, success wasn't fancy cars or mansions. It was seeing fields thrive because of my technology, watching other farmers benefit from what I'd built. I never shared this with my family, not because I feared their mockery, but because I knew they wouldn't care. At every meeting, they still called me the farmer, still compared me to Liam, who bragged about his penthouse and model girlfriends. I endured, not because I was weak, but because I held a faint hope that one day they'd see me. Truly see me. Sarah, on the other hand, urged me to set boundaries. You don't owe them anything, she said one evening as we sat on the porch, stars twinkling over the Iowa sky. They don't respect you, and you don't need to keep trying to please them. I knew she was right, but part of me couldn't let go of family. I wanted to believe, however harshly they treated me, they were still my blood. Until one morning, as I checked the irrigation system in the field, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. Her voice was cold, reluctant. Ethan, you need to come to the house now. There's an urgent family meeting. I asked what was wrong, but she only said, You'll find out when you get here. I hung up, a chill running through me like a cold wind. Sarah, nearby, looked at me with worried eyes. Your mom? She asked. I nodded, forcing a smile to reassure her, but deep down I knew this trip wouldn't be simple. That morning I woke with a heaviness in my chest, like a stone pressing down on me. Early sunlight slipped through the curtains, casting beams on the worn wooden floor of our bedroom, but it couldn't dispel the unease clinging to me. Sarah slept soundly beside me, her curly hair a tangled mess on the pillow, her steady breaths a reminder that, even if the world outside crumbled, I still had her. But my mother's call from the day before echoed in my mind, like a bell tolling bad news. An urgent family meeting, she'd said, her voice icy, as if calling me was a duty rather than a desire. I knew my family, they never reached out unless they wanted something, and this time I had a sinking feeling that something was no small matter. 3 years had passed since Sarah and I got married. 3 years of long days in the fields, late nights in the basement office where I built Carter AgTech from nothing. My company was now worth $60 million. But to my family, I was still the poor farmer, and I'd learned to live with that. I hadn't told them about Carter AgTech's success. Not because I wanted to hide my wealth, but because I could never find the right moment to share it. Sarah always reminded me that our success didn't need validation from people who never truly saw us. I sat up, trying to shake off the tangled thoughts. Today was Saturday, the day I had to drive 3 hours to Des Moines for the urgent family meeting my mother had demanded. Sarah stirred as if sensing my unease. "You okay?" she asked, her voice groggy but full of concern. I forced a smile, though it couldn't mask my worry. "Just don't know what they want," I said, trying to sound calm. Sarah sat up, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever happens, remember I'm here for you." I nodded, grasping her hand, feeling the warmth of her slender fingers. But deep down, I knew facing my family, my parents and Liam, was never easy. Before heading to Des Moines, I got a text from Jake, an old college friend now working in finance in Chicago. Jake and I didn't talk often, but he was one of the few who knew about Carter AgTech. His message was brief but hit like a punch. "Ethan, heads up, Liam's in deep trouble. Heard he got into a risky investment and lost everything. Might have dragged your parents' money down too. Be careful." I reread it, my heart racing. Liam? The one always bragging about million-dollar deals, his penthouse, his lavish life. How could he fail so badly he'd pull our parents into it? But then I remembered his smirks, calling my farm a dump and telling me to get a real job. Maybe that arrogance led to this mistake. I didn't tell Sarah about Jake's text. She was already worried about the trip and I didn't want to burden her more. I kissed her, said I'd be back soon, and climbed into the old pickup to drive to Des Moines. On the road, I tried to focus on the sprawling cornfields, the familiar country song on the radio, but my mind drifted to the past. Family gatherings, their jabs, my parents' disappointed looks. It played like an old film looping in my head. I wondered what they wanted this time. To mock me again or to demand something I couldn't give? When I reached Des Moines, it was late afternoon. My parents' house looked the same. White picket fence, manicured lawn, Mom's flower pots on the porch. But today, it didn't feel familiar. It was like a stage, and I was about to walk into a play without a script. I took a deep breath and knocked. Mom opened the door, her face tense, no trace of a smile. "Ethan, you're here," she said, her voice strained, like she was forcing herself to stay calm. "Come in, everyone's waiting." I stepped into the living room where Dad, Liam, and Mom were already gathered. Dad sat in his armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, his gaze heavy. Liam stood by the window, hands in his pockets, his expensive suit now wrinkled like he'd worn it for days. Mom sat on the sofa, hands clasped tightly, her eyes avoiding mine. No one greeted me. No one smiled. The air was thick like before a storm. "Sit down, Ethan," Dad said, his voice low and cold. I pulled up a chair, sitting down, the tension feeling like a job interview. "What's so urgent?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Dad cleared his throat, glancing at Liam as if signaling him to speak, but Liam just stared at the floor, silent. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice trembling. "Ethan, our family, we're in big trouble. Liam invested in a fund and we've lost everything." I blinked, processing her words. "Lost everything?" I asked, though Jake's text had already clued me in. Dad jumped in, his tone sharp. "Liam put money into a high-risk fund. He convinced us to invest, savings, retirement, all of it. Now it's gone. We're drowning in debt." He paused, eyeing me like he was sizing me up. "We need your help." I looked at Liam, waiting for an explanation, but he stayed quiet, eyes glued to the floor. The guy who bragged about his investment genius now looked like a defeated man. Anger surged in me, not just because he lost our parents' money, but because I knew if I'd failed, they'd never forgive me. But Liam, they were still shielding him, calling me in to help. "What exactly do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice tinged with exhaustion. Dad took a deep breath, locking eyes with me. "We need you to sell that farm," he said, his tone final, like it was obvious. "That land, it's got some value. Sell it and we can pay off the debts and start over." I froze, feeling like I'd been slapped. The farm, where Sarah and I had poured our sweat, our hearts, our dreams, where I'd built a multi-million-dollar company they didn't even know about. I looked at Dad, then Mom, then Liam, searching for a sign they were joking. But no. Mom nodded, her eyes teary like she was trying to seem heartbroken. "Ethan, it's the only way," she said. "You have to do this for the family." Liam finally spoke, but his voice lacked its old arrogance. "Bro, you don't need that land living like you do. Sell it. Help me out this once." He didn't even look at me. My blood boiled, but I held it in, trying to stay calm. Dad chimed in, his voice carrying that familiar disdain. "All your life, you've just been digging in the dirt, Ethan. Now's the time to do something useful. Think of this as your way to make up for never contributing to this family." "Make up?" I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. I looked at them, my so-called family, and realized they'd never valued me. To them, the farm was just worthless land. To them, I was a failure, useless to the family. Sarah was right. I owed them nothing, but they thought I owed them my entire life. I took a deep breath, stopping myself from storming out. "I need time to think," I said, standing up. Mom grabbed my hand, her eyes wet. "Ethan, don't be selfish," she whispered. But I pulled away, saying nothing. I walked outside, the late afternoon chill hitting my face like a reminder to return. To Sarah, to the people who truly loved me. On the drive home, I was silent, my mind a mess. I thought about years of enduring their jabs, trying to hold on to family ties despite their disregard. I thought about Liam, who always treated me like a joke, now dragging everyone into ruin with his arrogance. And I thought about Sarah, who stood by me even when I doubted myself. When I reached the farm, it was dark. Sarah was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of tea. She stood when she saw me, her eyes worried. "How'd it go, Ethan?" she asked. I hugged her, feeling like everything in me was breaking. "They want me to sell the farm," I said, my voice hoarse. "Liam lost our parents' money, and they think I should pay for his mistake." Sarah held me tightly, saying little, but her presence was enough to tell me that whatever lay ahead, we'd face it together. But in my heart, a decision was forming. I wouldn't let my family destroy what Sarah and I had built. Never. The next morning, I woke early before the sun rose. Sarah was still fast asleep, her curly hair a tangled mess on the pillow. I slipped out of bed quietly and headed to the basement, my small office where Carter AgTech was born. The computer screen glowed, casting a faint blue light over scattered papers and irrigation system diagrams. I opened my email, checking reports from my team, but my mind kept circling back to my family. I still couldn't believe they'd asked me to sell the farm, as if all of Sarah's and my hard work was worth nothing. Then an email from Jake, my finance friend in Chicago, stopped me cold. The subject line read, "About Liam. You need to know this." I clicked, my heart pounding. Jake's message was short but cut like a knife. "Ethan, you're a good guy and you deserve the truth. About a year ago, Liam tried to convince one of your big clients, the winery in California, to ditch their contract with Carter AgTech, saying you weren't reliable. He told them your company was a failing gamble, not worth investing in, and pushed them toward bigger competitors. Luckily, they didn't listen to Liam's advice. Thought you should know." I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling my blood boil. Liam? Not only had he belittled me in front of our family, but he'd tried to sabotage my company. I remembered the California winery deal, the $200,000 contract that launched Carter AgTech. There was a moment when they hesitated, asking for more time to review, but I never knew why. Now I did. Liam, with his arrogance and envy, had tried to ruin me, not just to prove I was a failure, but to protect his star image in our parents' eyes. I printed Jake's email, my hands trembling as I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. I didn't plan to use it as a weapon, but I needed it as a reminder that I wasn't imagining Liam's hostility. I went upstairs and found Sarah making coffee in the kitchen. She looked at me, frowning. "You okay?" she asked. I told her about Jake's email, my voice a mix of anger and hurt. Sarah set down her coffee mug and hugged me. "You don't deserve to be treated like this," she said, her voice trembling. "But you'll get through it, like always. And I'm here." I held her tightly, feeling the fire in me reignite. At noon, I called Mom back. Her voice was still cold, impatient. "Ethan, have you decided?" she asked, as if certain I'd agree. "I'm coming," I said, "but I want everyone there, and I want my wife to join." There was a brief pause, then she replied reluctantly, "Fine. Sunday, 6 p.m. I hung up, my heart racing. Not from fear, but because I knew this time I wouldn't stay silent. Sarah and I prepared for the trip like we were gearing up for battle. She wore a simple green dress, her hair tied high, looking both gentle and resolute. I stuck to my flannel shirt and jeans, but in my pocket was Jake's printed email, like a talisman. On the drive to Des Moines, Sarah held my hand, her silence a source of strength. "Whatever you say, I'm with you," she said as we parked outside my parents' house. I kissed her forehead, whispering, "Thank you." The living room was as tense as before. Dad sat in his armchair, whiskey in hand, his gaze sharp. Mom was on the sofa, hands clasped tightly, her face strained. Liam stood by the window, more haggard than ever, his wrinkled suit, messy hair, and red-rimmed eyes betraying his state. No one greeted us, no one offered a seat. I pulled a chair for Sarah, then sat down, meeting their eyes. "I've thought about selling the farm," I began, my voice calm but firm. Dad raised an eyebrow. Mom leaned forward as if certain I'd cave. Liam stayed silent, staring at the floor. "But before I decide," I continued, "there's something you all need to know." I took a deep breath, time seeming to slow. This was the moment I'd kept hidden for 3 years, one I never thought I'd have to reveal. But after Jake's email, I knew I wasn't just protecting the farm. I had to expose the truth. "The farm isn't just farmland," I said, a hint of pride in my voice. "It's the headquarters of Carter Ag Tech, an agricultural technology company I founded. It's now worth $60 million with patents for automated irrigation systems and soil analysis software used across the US and internationally." The room went silent. The clock ticked on the wall. Mom's breath hitched. Dad set his glass down, his eyes shifting from doubt to shock. Liam looked up, mouth agape, but speechless. Sarah's hand rested lightly on my knee, a reminder I was doing the right thing. "I've worked day and night to build it," I went on, my voice growing stronger. "I faced droughts, failures, and your mockery. But I didn't stop because I believed in what I was doing. Now my company helps thousands of farmers save water, boost yields, and protect the land. It's not the worthless land you think. It's my dream, and Sarah's." Mom covered her mouth, eyes glistening. Dad shook his head, disbelieving. Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I gave a bitter smile, feeling a knot in my chest unravel. "Because I knew you wouldn't care," I said. "Every time I tried to talk about my work, you called it a dump, called me a poor farmer. So I kept it to myself, and to those who actually believed in me." I glanced at Sarah, her smile radiant with pride. But I wasn't done. I pulled Jake's printed email from my pocket and placed it on the table. "And Liam," I said, my voice icy, "do you know why our family lost money? Not just because you threw it into a risky fund, but because you tried to sabotage my company. You advised investors that startups like Carter AgTech would fail. You even tried to convince my big client, the California winery, to cancel their contract, saying I wasn't reliable. But you were wrong. And your arrogance dragged Mom and Dad down with you." Liam paled, his hands trembling. What are you talking about?" he stammered, but his eyes betrayed the truth. Dad turned to Liam, his voice shaking with anger. "Is this true, Liam?" Mom sobbed, covering her face as if her world had collapsed. Liam didn't answer, his silence louder than any confession. I stood, feeling a weight lift. I'm not here to brag, I said, looking at each of them. I just wanted you to know the truth before you asked me to sell the most important thing in my life. The farm isn't for sale, and I won't let anyone belittle it, or me, ever again. Sarah stood, gripping my hand tightly. We didn't need to say more. I gave my family one last look, then turned and walked out. Mom called my name, her voice breaking. Ethan, wait! But I didn't stop. I'd waited too long for their approval, and now I realized I didn't need it anymore. I drove back to the farm through the Iowa night, the headlights of our old pickup sweeping across the swaying cornfields. Sarah sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine, a small gesture that calmed the storm of emotions still churning inside. The confrontation with my family, the moment I revealed the truth about Carter AgTech and Liam's sabotage, felt like a door slamming shut on the past. I was relieved, not because I'd won, but because I was finally free. Free from their taunts, from my parents' disappointed looks, and from Liam's shadow, the one I'd once thought I had to compete with for recognition. You okay? Sarah asked, her voice soft as the moonlight peeking through the sky. I glanced at her, her smile a small flame warming my heart. I'm okay, I said, and this time I meant it. Just didn't expect to feel this light. Sarah squeezed my hand, saying nothing more, but her eyes said everything. She was proud of me, and she'd always be by my side no matter what lay ahead. The days that followed felt like a new chapter. I was no longer haunted by my family's mockery. Instead, I focused on what truly mattered: Sarah, the farm, and Carter AgTech. My company was growing faster than ever. After the California winery deal, we landed 2 more major contracts with farms in Nebraska and Texas, eager to use my automated irrigation system. The soil analysis software I'd developed was also chosen by an NGO in Africa to help farmers in arid regions. Every confirmation email, every client call reminded me I'd chosen the right path. Not to prove my family wrong, but to create something meaningful. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Expanding Carter AgTech meant longer work days, meetings with investors, and the pressure to meet rising expectations. Some nights I sat in the basement office until late, my eyes burning from staring at the computer screen too long. Sarah would bring me coffee, gently nudging me to sleep. You can't save the world if you're exhausted, she'd say, a playful edge to her voice. I'd laugh, pulling her onto my lap, her warmth easing my fatigue. Sarah was just as busy. She still taught at the elementary school, where the kids adored her for her stories and patient guidance. But she also helped with the company, from reviewing reports to organizing workshops for local farmers on using our technology. I'm not great with tech, she'd laugh, but I'm good at making people see how amazing you are. And she was. Farmers, once skeptical of technology, began trusting me thanks to Sarah's simple, relatable explanations. One August afternoon, as I checked the irrigation system in the field, Sarah ran out, her face glowing like sunlight. Ethan, she called, her voice brimming with excitement. I turned to see her holding a pregnancy test, her hand trembling slightly. I'm pregnant, she said, her eyes shimmering with tears. I froze, the world seeming to stop. Then I rushed to her, hugging her tightly, laughing so loudly that birds in nearby trees scattered. Really? You're sure? I asked, though the 2 clear lines on the test were unmistakable. Sarah nodded, smiling through tears. We're having a baby, Ethan. That night we lay in bed, my hand resting gently on her stomach, though I couldn't yet feel anything but her warmth. What kind of dad do you think I'll be? I asked, a hint of worry in my voice. Sarah tilted her head, her gaze soft. You'll be an amazing dad, she said, because you've always known how to care, not just for the land, but for the people you love. I kissed her forehead, feeling that every hardship in life was worth it for this moment. In the midst of our growing happiness, I heard snippets about my family through mutual acquaintances. Liam, after our confrontation, seemed to lose his spark. He was fired from his investment firm in Chicago, not just for the massive loss from the risky fund, but because his reputation tanked when colleagues learned he'd tried to sabotage his own brother's company. The penthouse he'd bragged about was repossessed by the bank, and his model girlfriend left when he could no longer fund her lifestyle. Liam moved back to Des Moines to live with our parents, working a mundane office job, but I heard he was often irritable, as if the world owed him an apology. My parents weren't faring much better. Their retirement savings were wiped out by Liam's bad investments, forcing them to sell their stately Des Moines home and move to a smaller apartment. The weekend dinner parties and gatherings with upscale friends were now a thing of the past. Mom called me once about 4 months after the confrontation, her voice frail. "Ethan, I just want to apologize." But I cut her off, not out of anger, but because I didn't want to revisit the past. "Mom, I don't hold a grudge," I said, "but I need to live my life. I wish you and Dad well." I hung up, feeling like the final door had closed. I didn't take joy in their struggles. Part of me still ached because they were my blood, but I realized I couldn't save them from their own choices. Liam chose arrogance and envy. My parents chose to believe in him without ever giving me a chance, and I chose Sarah, the farm, and my dream, and I had no regrets. Carter AgTech kept growing. A year after the confrontation, we received a $3 million grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture for research on drought-resistant crops. If successful, this project could transform agriculture in arid regions, feeding millions. I remember getting the notification letter, sitting with Sarah at the kitchen table, reading it over and over in disbelief. "I did it," I said, my voice trembling. Sarah hugged me, laughing. "We did it, Ethan." We used part of the grant to upgrade the farm, building a small office for Carter AgTech's team, now 10 full-time employees. I also started a program to support local farmers, offering our technology at discounted rates. Seeing farmers, once skeptical of me, now shake my hand with grateful eyes, I felt prouder than ever. Sarah, her belly growing, remained radiant as sunlight. She took a break from teaching to prepare for our first child, but still joined our community projects. She led classes for village kids, teaching them about sustainable agriculture and the value of the land. "Our child will grow up loving nature," she said, rubbing her belly, "just like their dad." One autumn evening, when Sarah was 8 months pregnant, we strolled through the field. The sky was clear, studded with stars, and the air carried the damp scent of earth after rain. I held her hand, feeling like the world was just us, well, the three of us. "Did you ever think you'd be this happy?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. I stopped, looking at her, then out at the field, where I'd sown seeds, sweated, and built a future. "Never," I admitted. "But now I know that with you and our child, I don't need anything else." Sarah smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "We're not just growing crops, Ethan," she said, echoing words I'd once told her. "We're growing a future." I kissed her, feeling that every hardship, every heartbreak had led me to this moment. A family, a dream, and a life I'd never trade. 2 years have passed since I walked out of my parents' house in Des Moines, leaving behind the stifling living room filled with taunts and brazen demands. I still remember the relief of driving back to the farm, Sarah's hand gripping mine, as if we'd just weathered a storm and found clear skies. Since then, our life has been like a field sown in the right season. Day by day, month by month, it sprouted, blossomed, and became something more beautiful than I ever dreamed. Now I sit on the porch looking out at the cornfield swaying under the sunset. Beside me is Sarah, her curly hair loose, her smile as warm as the day we met. On her lap is our son Jacob, a 1.5-year-old with big round eyes like his mother's and a mischievous grin like mine. Jacob babbles, "Da-da, da-da," while trying to snatch the straw hat off my head. I laugh, lifting him up, kissing his chubby cheeks. "You little bandit," I say, making him giggle. Sarah watches us, her eyes brimming with happiness. "You're an amazing dad, Ethan," she says softly. I kiss her, feeling like the entire world is contained in this moment. Our life is now filled with joy, but not without challenges. Carter AgTech has become a recognized name in agricultural technology. After the $3 million grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we expanded research on drought-resistant crops with successful trials in Arizona and Ethiopia. My patents are now licensed to dozens of companies worldwide, bringing steady revenue. The small office at the farm now houses 20 employees, from engineers to marketers, all sharing my passion for sustainable agriculture. But success comes with pressure. I often fly to conferences in New York, San Francisco, or even Nairobi to present our technology. Those trips make me miss Sarah and Jacob desperately. Each time I return, I rush to hug them, as if afraid that staying away too long might make this happiness slip away. Sarah, with her boundless patience, is my anchor. She manages Carter AgTech's community projects in my absence, leading classes for farmers and kids about land conservation. "We're building a legacy, Ethan," she said one evening as we sat on the porch, Jacob asleep in her arms. Not just for Jacob, but for the next generation. Jacob is our greatest joy. He has Sarah's gentleness, but my curiosity. At just 1.5, he loves toddling out to the fields with me, his tiny hands grabbing at the soil, his eyes wide at the irrigation sensors. "Careful, buddy," I laugh, hoisting him onto my shoulders. "This land is our friend, but you've got to learn to respect it." Sarah teases that Jacob will grow up to be an agricultural engineer like me, but I just want him to love nature and live true to his heart. While our life grows fuller, I occasionally hear about my family through acquaintances. Liam, after losing his job in Penthouse, spiraled into self-destruction. He turned to alcohol, often getting drunk and smashing things in my parents' small apartment. A friend said he got into fights with co-workers at his new job, leading to another firing. My parents, now living in a cramped apartment in the Des Moines suburbs, bear the brunt of Liam's anger. Gone are the lavish dinner parties and luxurious trips. Their savings are depleted, and they live off Dad's meager pension. I don't hold a grudge, but I haven't reached out. The last call from Mom, when she apologized, was our final conversation. I thought maybe we all needed time to heal wounds too deep. But one October afternoon, as I played with Jacob in the yard, an old car pulled up to the farm's gate. I squinted and saw my parents step out, looking far older than the last time I saw them. Mom wore a worn sweater, her hair nearly all gray. Dad, once tall and imposing, was now slightly stooped, his steps slow. They stood there, looking at me and Jacob, their eyes full of hesitation. Sarah emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, glancing at me for guidance. I nodded slightly, lifted Jacob, and walked toward them. "Dad, Mom," I said, my voice calm but tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here?" Mom looked at me, her eyes glistening. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "we just wanted to see you and our grandson." She gazed at Jacob, who was curiously peering at her from my arms, and she broke into tears. Dad stood beside her, hands in his pockets, his eyes heavy. I invited them inside. Sarah brewed tea, set out a plate of cookies, and sat beside me, her hand lightly on my shoulder as encouragement. Jacob, unafraid of strangers, crawled to Mom, offering her a Lego block. She smiled through tears, lifting him into her arms, hugging him tightly. "He's so much like you," she said, her voice choking. "The eyes, the smile." Dad leaned down, ruffling Jacob's hair, his gaze softer than I'd ever seen. After a quiet moment, Mom spoke. "Ethan, we're not here to ask for anything," she said, her eyes fixed on Jacob. "We just want to apologize, truly apologize. We were wrong to treat you the way we did, to compare you to Liam, to not see what you've accomplished." She paused, wiping tears. "We favored Liam, thinking he'd bring us pride. But now we see the consequences." Dad chimed in, his voice hoarse. "Liam, he's not the son I was once proud of. He drinks, yells, breaks things. We can't control him. But what hurts most is realizing that while we were blinded by Liam, we lost you, the son we should have been proud of." I sat there, listening, my emotions a tangle. Part of me still hurt, remembering their taunts, their disappointed looks, their demand to sell the farm. But a larger part felt pity. They weren't perfect, but they were my parents, and they were suffering. I glanced at Sarah, who nodded slightly as if reading my thoughts. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice low but sincere. I don't hold a grudge. I forgave you long ago, not for your sake, but because I wanted to live my life without that burden. But I hope you understand that what I do because I believe in it, not to prove anything to anyone. Mom sobbed, hugging Jacob tighter. Dad nodded, his eyes red. We understand, Ethan, he said, and we're proud of you even if it's too late to say it. They shared more about their struggles, about Liam, about sleepless nights filled with regret. I listened without judgment, feeling a deep sadness. As they prepared to leave, Mom hugged me, whispering, "Thank you for letting us see our grandson." Dad shook my hand, his grip firmer than I remembered. I watched them walk to their car, my heart heavy. Sarah stood beside me, squeezing my hand. "You wanted them to stay, didn't you?" she asked softly. I looked at her, amazed at how well she knew me. "You wouldn't mind?" I asked. Sarah smiled, shaking her head. "They're family, Ethan, and Jacob needs his grandparents." I ran to the gate, calling out, "Dad, Mom." They stopped, turning to me. "Sarah and I want you to move here, live with us," I said, my voice steady. "The farm's big enough, and I want Jacob to grow up with his grandparents." Mom froze, then rushed to hug me, crying like a child. Dad stood there, his eyes glistening, but he only nodded, as if unable to believe what he'd heard. A month later, my parents moved to the farm, bringing a few suitcases and old mementos. We fixed up the small shed out back, turning it into a cozy space for them. Mom started planting flowers around the house like she used to in Des Moines. Dad, despite his declining health, loved joining me in the fields, watching me check the irrigation system. "Son, I don't understand this tech stuff," he'd chuckle. "But I see you're doing big things." His words, simple as they were something I never thought I'd hear. Family life became lively. Mom told Jacob bedtime stories about her youth. Dad taught him to throw a ball, even though Jacob was too young to catch. Sarah and Mom bonded in the kitchen, baking cookies or cooking big dinners. I watched them, feeling old wounds heal, not just through time, but through love and forgiveness. As for Liam, I only know he's still in Des Moines, living alone in a rented apartment. I haven't reached out, and neither has he. I hope someday he finds his path as I found mine. I just wish him peace. And I realized not every wound needs an apology to heal. Sometimes time and a heart ready to forgive are enough.